sometimes you wonder if it's just isolated to your particular corporation or company or
Yeah.
institution that you're working for or organization. But then when you start seeing that it's like across the board, like it's not just us, it
Yeah.
sort of made it worse because I feel like they were doing their best to make us think that we were crazy, that we were sort of being sort of irrational with our lived experience, and that maybe it was art, an interpretation that we made up in our minds or how we perceived the situation, and a lot of the gaslighting, right? A lot of that stuff was sort of in the mix of our advocacy work, like as a response to us, and but when the whole country sort of went on fire around racial justice, it just really intensified what was going on at work.
Mi gente, dímelo, dímelo, what's good? Welcome to another episode of the Quién Tú Eres podcast brought to you by Plural. You already know it's your boy Pavel bringing you another special episode with another very special guest. As a reminder, on this podcast, our mission is to redefine professionalism because, let's face it, we're all tired of faking it at work. We're tired of the code switching, the assimilation that we've been trained to believe that we need to do in order to be successful. Every episode, we have a new guest join us for a candid conversation where we explore their journey between professionalism and authenticity. Speaking of guests, this week's guest, who you heard in the intro, is Antonio Morales. Before getting into the full conversation, let me give you a quick bio on him so that you have more context going into it. So, Antonio is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services. It's a private practice dedicated to serving the mental health needs of Black and Brown folk across communities. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and he identifies as a mixed race Afro Boricua. He takes pride in honoring his indigenous African and Taino ancestors through his work. To get Antonio's full bio, please be sure to check out the show notes of this week's episode. Now that you have a little bit more context into who our guest is, let's get into the episode. Let's start off with the word authenticity. It's a buzzword. People say it all the time, but what does it mean to you when you hear it?
I mean, I know it can mean so many things to different people, but to me, it sort of means just being true to myself, right? Like, and when I mean myself, I mean my values, right? Stepping into spaces, not compromising my values just to make other people sort of feel safe. And I think, when it comes to Black and Brown folk in particular, we have been sort of conditioned in, a society of white supremacy not to be authentic. And so to be authentic is like rebellious, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it
Because
is.
like you're not supposed to be you. Like how dare you? And so authenticity means that just coming into spaces with your values intact, not compromising who you are, you know, um, in response to sort of this forced assimilation or conformity. You know what I'm saying?
When do you think that conditioning started? Because I'd argue that it often even starts at home.
My goodness, the conditioning is my whole life, like since I was born. I mean, this is the United States of America, right? And part of sort of when you think about who we are in America, Black and Brown folk in particular, because that's how I identify. Um, it starts from the very beginning. Like everything about your life is about sort of the erasure of you. You learn it in school, you learn it at home, you learn it in your community, right? Like there's always we get messages that remind us over and over again that we're not allowed to be who we're supposed to be. Like we're supposed to be other than who we are. And I think that, and that's in the media as well, right? I mean, you see images of us, that are, I mean, you see it all over the place, like images of us that are intended to degrade and dehumanize us. And we're supposed to emulate that. And so the
What
condition,
are some of those images that you remember seeing? You said media, school.
I mean, think about like if I think about myself and sort of the representation I've seen on say in the movies or in media, television shows. I'm supposed to be one of those dudes on the corner, with a do rag. With a 40 ounce playing dominoes, right? I'm not supposed to be like
Not the
educated. I'm not,
dominoes.
yeah, dominoes, right? And so I think that I only saw it through mainstream media, like when things came out, whatever it was, like either Crooklyn or I Like It Like That. Remember that movie, that old school movie, I Like It Like That? And so those are the images I saw of us. But that was really us, but it wasn't all of us. You know what I'm saying? Like it was one sort of image that they sort of pushed forward to make it seem like, and there's not, first of all, there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I'm just saying, right? That really is me still. But it doesn't allow us to sort of practice other ways of being. We're just supposed to sort of fit into this box that doesn't necessarily represent the fullness of who we are as people. You know what I'm saying?
I feel you, man. And tell me a little bit about at home growing up in Brooklyn. What sort of guidance do you think your family provided with you? Because oftentimes they're like, they want you to be a certain way, so they don't so you're not quote unquote embarrassing them out there in the streets.
I don't even know if I received that necessarily from my family because we grew up, I was my formative years was in Red Hook, Brooklyn, New York, and that was the hood back in the '80s, and so um, I mean, there was no. The only thing I think I sort of learned from my family is sort of not to get into trouble, right? Like, because we in the streets, the kids, right? We're running around, we're playing around, we're acting silly as kids, and so we just. I think because there was a framework from the larger society, the dominant culture, that sort of put us into like the criminalized box. That the only sort of conditioning was not to get into trouble, like not to be a criminal, right? Because there was, I don't know if there was anything beyond our neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? I didn't. There was nothing being told to me. I wasn't taught that there was anything beyond my neighborhood, specifically from my family, right? Because we grew up in poverty. We didn't have resources in the same way. Not everybody was educated. Most of my uncles and aunts, all of them dropped out, and so, or most of them dropped out, not all of them, and so there was no sort of anything beyond the community, beyond the neighborhood. So it was just to stay out of trouble mostly, I think, is what I sort of received. Like, behave yourself. Because I always felt like I was in trouble, even though I didn't do anything. I was always like in trouble. I was not even doing anything, but I was in trouble. Well, I don't know why, but I just was. So I
Yeah.
think that's the main sort of message. Just behave yourself, like keep your head low. And which is, I learned to walk into spaces sort of having to feel like I was like my behavior was always scrutinized. Like, and it wasn't even that I did anything. It was just like what I represented. You know what I'm saying? And so then I had a sort of, and I carried that into my life. As an adult. Whether it was through when I was going into higher ed or whether I was going into different professional spaces,
Because you were
professional
told
spaces.
early on, right, of like behave a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, look, the kids on the street, we hang around the block. That was back in the day. There was no internet, right? So we was always in the streets, running around, playing freeze tag, playing red light, green light, one, two, three, climbing on buildings and on abandoned buildings and going into abandoned buildings and going on to all types of stuff. And I remember one time we was our elementary school PS 27s. We climbed onto a little roof. It was just a little roof, a little roof. We was like challenging ourselves, as kids. Anyway, the alarm started ringing, but it wasn't about us. Somebody ran out the building with something we didn't know, and then the cops came and frisked us. And I was like 7. Like all we're doing is climbing on top of the roof because there's no playground around. so and so we got frisked at an early age, um, and I feel like that was part of my conditioning, right? Like, and it goes back to like the criminalization of black and brown men in particular, and how we're supposed to behave all the time and not get into trouble. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, it's interesting going back to that word conditioning, right? Because earlier in the conversation, like the conditioning, we spoke about it from your individual standpoint, but the representation in the media is also conditioning society to view you a certain way.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean that's part of it. I mean we're all sort of conditioned in the society. We're not separate from it, right? If you
Yeah.
think about the dominant culture, which is rooted and grounded in white supremacy, all of us are sort of infused with that, right? So the ideas, the values, and the customs that sort of trickle down or into us from white supremacy goes into our communities as well into our families and then into us. It's just there's no separation. You can't escape it, especially in the Western Hemisphere, right? Like all
Yeah.
of us have been sort of impacted all the way from North America all the way down to the end of South America. All of us have been impacted by this sort of white supremacist dominant culture, and so it's inescapable. I didn't have it. Where else am I going to get conditioned? Like where? Like, you know what I'm saying? All of us are infused with it. So um, there's no separation between the dominant culture and then how I sort of we inherited it, those messages.
And you mentioned something interesting too. Is like, all right, I'm getting this feedback on my behavior, keep my head down, act a certain way. Into
Yeah.
when you started even like working in higher grade, like how did some of those early, how did some of that early feedback impact how you showed up when you started working?
I mean, going back to elementary school, right, and sort of always getting to trouble for no reason. Like I feel like I was always getting into trouble for not like I don't even know what I did. It was like beyond I couldn't even comprehend what was going on. And
What do you
so
mean?
that's
Like you were talking too much or something? Like what was it?
I could have been talking to. So I don't really know. I can't sort of. It just felt like I was constantly in trouble, and I always felt like I was a good kid, right? I was not like a bad kid. I wasn't causing trouble. I wasn't fight. I mean, I did fight, but I didn't fight people. Like I wasn't coming for nobody, right? I was just being a kid. But it was always there was a scrutiny about like my behavior, and so and I think it has to do a lot with being in schools that had predominantly white teachers, right? Who were not from our community. And so how black and brown boys act, it would be deemed a problem, right? Even though we're just being kids. And so, I mean, you can see the research now. You can see the rate of suspensions for black and brown kids in schools and how black and brown boys especially get the most suspensions, right? So I think it has to do with the fact that I'm in my community school, but with white teachers who don't necessarily get our culture, and so our behavior is constantly scrutinized because we're black and brown boys. And then that sort of training went into the professional field, right? So I already got it all the way from grade school, and then stepping into sort of my professional roles sort of that followed me because there was an expectation as well as a black and brown person to step as a man to step into these spaces and behave in a particular way. We had a sort of I've learned that we have to. I mean, we talk about code switching all the time, but it was more than code switching. As far as what it means to be a man and walking into spaces that are mostly predominantly white. We had to sort of shrink who we were. So it was beyond behavior at this point. It was like an erasure. You know what I'm saying? It was like, don't
Yeah.
be you fully, right? Because if I'm me fully, right, you're going to probably take that the wrong way. And that's what I've experienced over and over again in many of the organizations I've been part of
So
as a
what
professional.
in what ways do you think you had to diminish or hide parts of yourself? Like give me specific areas.
It's so interesting that you sort of are asking for specifics because it feels like um, the it's like the vibe, right, of spaces. And so even though it might not be told to you directly, it's almost like what the expectation is by the time you get there as a grown man, right? And so I think a lot of it had to do with how I speak. Like my speaking and delivery has been scrutinized over and over again, right? Like what is
What
Antonio
have people
saying?
said?
How is he saying it? I've been sort of uh, I've been accused of being aggressive, right? Especially when I'm sort of impassioned in whatever I'm sharing about, whatever the topic is. Like the word aggressive has been sort of, I've been labeled with that. And so
Me too.
even though I'm not aggressive, I'm like, you think I'm like, if you saw me being aggressive, then it'll be a different story. But I, like, if you think that's aggressive, me just being impassioned about, say, white supremacy, right? Say social justice, say, advocating on behalf of my clients, um, that's not aggression. That is passion. But because of how I present, people sort of link that to aggression. And so I think that's one of the things specifically that I can sort of point to is how I communicate, like my style of communication, the way I show up inside of my and my style of my self-expression, really. And so how I use my voice, I've had to learn to uh, watch myself, watch everything I say. Because they always say, "Oh, it's not about like, it's not about." You think about, don't think about. It's like, okay, what's your intention, but what's the impact? What's the impact? But what's the impact based on your biases? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, I remember one time I was having a conversation with a colleague, and it was a conversation because we was dealing with some really challenging situations in the workplace, and so my take on it was impassioned. And then I, there was like this thing, like you're coming, like I was coming for that person, like I was coming to like get them, like attack them, and that was completely not even the case. Like I was not even thinking that. Like I was just talking, and so there's ways that people sort of communicate to me that, what the expectation is for me. And again, this goes all the way to grade school. It's not like it's isolated just to professional spaces. It's like what we've been taught along the way, right? Because
Yeah.
then, we'll get in trouble. The whole thing is to stay out of trouble. And that means shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until you disappear.
Yeah. So in those scenarios, let's say where you are called aggressive, like what's the impact on either your work or how you show up moving forward? Because I mean, probably gonna start changing some parts about you, right?
Well, I mean, that's the expectation that I would change parts of me, but I know better, right? I'm not oblivious to what we're dealing with in the United States of America as Black and Brown folk, and so I don't. As a result of that, I don't change, right? I remain the same. But the impact is that I end up having to advocate on my behalf, which takes a lot of energy because I'm there to I'm in spaces to do my work.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm not
Now you
I'm
also have
not
to
here to like battle you and advocate on behalf of myself.
now you also have to be an employee but an educator. You have to educate
Yes.
on why
Uh,
that word is biased, on why all these other things. Yeah. That other people don't have to deal with. They don't have to play that
that
role.
is not even a conversation. Like it's not even a conversation, and so that's an extra job that we don't get paid for, and I feel like we do it over and over again as Black and Brown folk in different spaces when
Yeah.
it comes to work. Like if you think about like this DEI movement that's going on in America, right? Like most of the people that's doing that is us in our positions for free. We're not getting. When I was working at Rutgers University, my previous job,
Do you want
um,
me to bleep that out?
no. When I was
Okay.
working at Rutgers University, my previous job, I was the team lead of the Justice and Equity team, which was basically our diversity committee. And a lot of the work that I did, to sort of support my particular center the department I was working for, was work that I wasn't paid for. Like a lot of extra work that I did to educate my colleagues, mostly
Yeah.
my white counterparts, that was not part of my job description. But I
Yeah.
felt like if I didn't do it, no one else would. And then maybe
Right.
the culture in this department wouldn't shift. You know what I'm saying? Which it eventually did shift, but we had to sort of sacrifice some of who we are, like our attention, our focus, just to sort of educate our colleagues. And it wasn't even like they wanted to be educated. They just wanted us to shut up, like walk up, like don't even talk, like don't even be here. And
Yo,
so,
that's such an interesting point around because I often talk about the opportunity cost that comes with this conflict between authenticity and assimilation. But you bring up such an interesting point and like a quantifiable point. Like I can quantify the hours that I'm taking out of my job, which is what you hired me for, to like educate people, which is like not what you're paying me for. Like because I'm dealing with all this shit and because you don't let me be myself without the pushback, I have to take time out of my job to have these conversations. You don't want me to do that, right? Just let me be myself.
and a lot of it was like overtime work when I wasn't on the clock, right? The
Yeah.
extra work that I did outside of my working hours, because obviously I have to, I'm hired to do a particular job, so I have to get the
Right.
job done. So a lot of the stuff that I was doing was outside of working hours, right? And
Yeah.
I don't, and I think and I contributed in a powerful way. Let's not get it twisted. I was very effective, right? But the point is that in retrospect, they didn't deserve that contribution from me. You know what I'm saying? Like this, like you know what I'm saying?
I get it.
I don't got the words, but it feels like, and when I think about in America, how many black and brown professionals are dealing with this in workspaces, how many people are sort of doing extra work outside of their working hours, those spaces don't deserve us. I obviously learned that in retrospect. I mean, it was a good lesson, but um, I don't think sometimes when we're still in it that we recognize, why am I contributing to this space? Because I'm over here trying to support you and train you and teach you how to respect us, how to treat us with dignity. That's the whole thing of DEI.
Yeah.
How do you get people to treat you with respect and dignity, right? How do you get them to treat us in a way that's equitable, right?
Right.
And so
So that when I bring more
that's
people in
how,
here, they won't go through the things that I went through, pretty
yeah.
much.
I mean,
The ironic thing about all of that work is that, like, you're there, you're like, let me do my job. You try to be yourself and you get resistance, right? So then you're part of this group to educate people on what just happened. Yet I don't know if this happened to you, but then you get feedback that you're spending too much time on that other thing. You should be spending time on your job. Yet the only reason I'm spending time on that other thing is because you're not letting me be myself.
I didn't, you know what? I didn't even get feedback on that I was
I got a
spending
lot.
too
I got
much.
a lot of that.
Oh, did you? I didn't even,
Yeah.
what's funny? I didn't get that feedback because you couldn't say nothing about my job, right? As far as my performance, my work performance was on point, so you couldn't say anything. What they really wanted was for me to shut the fuck up. Like, that was it. Like, disappear, please, because you're holding us too accountable, right? And we're supposed to talk about it. We're not supposed to hold the space accountable. It's supposed to be a nice gesture to have conversations about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now they got the belonging thing, right? They have to add belonging because we don't belong. We don't feel like we belong. Not in a lived experience, and so it
And
wasn't that.
they told you that?
No, I mean, they didn't have to say it. You can, which is why most of us left, right? You feel it.
No, this
People,
idea of like you speak about this experience of like they just wanted you to shut the fuck up, right? Like
yeah,
talk to me about like why you felt
absolutely.
like why did you feel like that?
Okay, so you used the word earlier a few minutes ago, resistance. It wasn't resistance, it was backlash, right? And so I don't want to name specific ways that they were coming for me on purpose, but that was the backlash. And there was a lot of things that were made up about me, reports that were written on me that weren't true or accurate. So it was almost like I'm trying to figure out which one to share. So when I was hired to work at Rutgers, it was as a response to criticisms that black and brown students were having that the department that I was in was too white. And so they needed more staff of color, right? Clinicians of color to come in to represent the student body. And so it wasn't like there was sort of an original openness to getting us into the space, right? It was more like as a response to student criticisms. And so one of my jobs when I first got there was to basically do a needs assessment of the community and figure out what our students needed. And so because I was there to serve black and brown students, I spoke to black and brown students. And the criticisms I heard, first of all, I didn't even know I was signing up for this because I didn't know. I thought I was excited to start a new job. I was excited. I didn't know that I was going there as a response to student criticisms,
Right,
right? They
right.
don't tell you that when you signing up for the situation. So I went in there thinking I was very excited. I was very just super excited and just wanted to do so much work. And the first sort of evidence or feedback that I got from students was we don't feel like that space like we don't belong in that space. We've dealt with racial microaggressions and so on and so forth. And part of my job was to come back to my department and share my findings. In sharing my findings, I became like they attacked the messenger. So I was the messenger, right? Coming like this is what students are sharing. This is part of my needs assessment, and looking at what students' feedback is. This is what I'm going to share with you all. And I was just from that moment on, I became like public enemy number one because I was not because because the space was predominantly white, I was not allowed to sort of share about what students were saying because it was making people uncomfortable. And so,
Yeah.
and
And
because
making people look bad.
yeah, and because, and you know, I'm like, y'all don't even know who's in the room because I'm not gonna chuck and jive to make you feel comfortable. Like I'm gonna honor the black and brown students because that's why I'm here to begin with, and I'm gonna share what they're sharing. And so, as a matter of because I didn't sort of censor my sharing with my colleagues, I became the target because I became basically the mouthpiece, right? I was sort of speaking on behalf of the students now, right?
Right. Right.
Because
And instead of taking it out, because they can't take it out on the students, they got to take it
right,
out on somebody.
right, and then I became the target. So that's literally how it sort of, and then, and from that point forward, for about 5 years, I was dealing with sort of constant uh, attacks on my character. You know what I'm saying? Like they was looking for anything to make me the problem, and but the problem was for them was that I was so consistent with what I was saying, and my work was so on point that you really didn't have anything on me. So they had to make up things that were sort of egregious to sort of demonize me and sort of criminalize me in the space, like
When you
make
s-
me a threat to my community.
when you say that you were consistent with your work, are you saying that you would continue to bring up the points, which is really your job, right? Like this needs assessment and just continued feedback that you're hearing and being that spokesperson. Is that what
Yeah, I
you mean?
mean, that was part of it, but I'm saying my work in general, like serving black and brown students and, thinking about what types of services I could bring to them that were most helpful. And so my work was always on point, but the message was always consistent. Like it never like dwindled, right? In fact, I think I actually got louder because the backlash was so real that I just refused to submit because I knew what I was
Wow.
dealing with, right? And so I just got
So
louder
that
because
inspired you. Like that pushed you to go even harder.
that pushed me to go harder, which is when I became the team lead of the Justice and Equity team, which is our diversity committee. And I radicalized the fuck out of us. It was crazy. It was like
Wow.
crazy. But I'll tell you though, it was a real toll on me because that's not what I signed up for. Like I didn't mind sort of advocating on behalf of myself, my colleagues of color who also had similar experiences, and my students, but it was not what I signed up for. It was very, very degrading. And I knew that, you know, uh, I knew that I knew why I was advocating, right? I knew that my sort of movement was grounded in social justice, but the toll that it took on me was out of control. Like it was like, I was felt like every time I was driving to work that I was gonna have a heart attack or something because I was so like the space was so
Wow.
toxic that it felt like danger, like it was a dangerous environment. And one of the things I recognize is, which was a great distinction for me to see, when grew up in Brooklyn, Red Hook, New York, right? I was in the backyard playing as a kid. I was like 7, 6 years old, playing as a kid in the backyard. But the backyard was full of garbage, old C-town bags and
Yeah, yeah.
dirty diapers and broken bottles and rusty nails. But that was my oasis, right? And when I would because I used to like to sort of explore for dinosaur bones, because I thought I was gonna find dinosaur bones in the backyard. I would like to
Okay.
dig and stuff, right? I wouldn't find dinosaur bones. I would find like cat skulls and stuff and syringes. But that was my oasis, right? That was my sort of getaway from my family's craziness, because my family was, there was ratchet. And so, and I didn't know that they was, ratchet, not in a negative way, but it was just a lot of toxicity in the space in our family. And so the backyard was the solace. But I knew even in the backyard when I was sitting in there in the dirt, sort of looking for dinosaur bones, that there was something off about my experience. But obviously, I was too young to articulate what I was dealing with. But I felt degraded, even though I didn't know that I was, because I'm playing in garbage.
Yeah.
There's not a
Yeah.
swing set.
Yeah.
There's no like a nice bench. I'm
Yeah.
in garbage, playing in garbage. And looking back, sort of thinking about myself in that position, there was a degrading feeling. I felt degraded. And so why am I sharing this is because when I was in this toxic workplace, after I did everything by the book to get all my degrees and get all the licenses and everything I had to get, I felt like I was in garbage again. right? Because even though I was in a work environment, a professional working space, I felt like I was that kid playing in the garbage again because the experience was degrading. It didn't matter if I was in the hood in the 1980s versus being, in a professional space in the, now, right?
Was this your first job where you felt like, I don't know, like I'm just imagining you being very excited to go into this workspace, right? Like you see the title, you feel like you're gonna work with the people that you've always wanted to work with. You see an organization that the reps DEI, but then you get there and on some level you realize it's performative.
Oh, Lord.
Like was that the first? Like did you? I don't know. Like in some ways, lose a little hope for this,
For
for
what?
some of the work that you're doing, like for certain organizations. Like what was going through your mind around that?
Oh, well, um, no, I didn't lose hope, actually. I shifted my focus because remember, I spent a lot of time sort of trying to educate my white counterparts, my white colleagues, and I realized I was wasting a lot of my time. Like the work that I do is grounded in my commitment to Black and Brown folk, my community, right? It's not. I'm not committed to anything else, to anyone else, and I stand at that because that's what my work is driven by, right, and for. And so even though the experience was super toxic and degrading, at the same time it became sort of what compelled me to start my private practice, right? And so all the work that I do today through my private practice is intended for Black and Brown folk. That's my audience. I'm not talking to anyone else about anything. Period. The end. You know what I'm saying? My focus is um, how do I get us to a point where we can be liberated psychologically from white supremacy? Right? That's my whole thing. Because a lot of people sort of focus on wanting to change other people's minds about white supremacy, right? And their
Yeah,
role in it. I'm not interested in that. I
yeah,
want to change our minds about white supremacy. Because what I realize is that no matter how much you talk to our counterparts that benefit from white supremacy, right? It don't make a goddamn bit of difference to the quality of our lives anyway. Because they're not more committed to us than we got to be for ourselves. You know what I'm saying? And so the experiences that I had, and not only in the space that I mentioned, but in other organizations, got me to focus on what's really important, right? Empowering my own people. And I believe that, when we can liberate ourselves from the shackles, the psychological shackles of white supremacy, then we could really start our healing process. You know what I'm saying? And then
a
evolve into
hundred
who we're
percent,
supposed to be. You know what I'm
a
saying?
100%. You know what's interesting is that in managing and developing this company, at one point I was going to create products around changing the way that people do like bias training and all those kind of things. And at one point, I literally had that same conversation with myself that you did. I was like, "Yeah, but who's the audience for this?" And I paused and I was like, "Wait, this isn't for my people. Like, I want to actually create something for us." And I completely shifted the perspective and the focus of what I actually wanted to go out and build. And that's not to say that like I can't do that other thing eventually, but right now, like I want to put the focus on that. And for you, like I know it's a culmination of moments for you, right? It's a whole life experience that
Yeah.
got you here, but you did mention a few moments of like driving to work and feeling depressed or whatever it was. Like was there one moment where that just like clicked for you where you were just like, this isn't my purpose, like my purpose is to focus on this Black and brown folks, as you mentioned?
Well, when the pandemic happened, the COVID pandemic, we had to work from home, right? Because of we were all working from home, which was the new thing, right? But what
Yeah.
was so interesting to me is that the the beef started before we was working from home, right?
The
But what was
beef.
so interesting is that it intensified even though we was working from home, right?
Really?
It intensified, and I think the reason why it intensified is because when the George Floyd situation happened, and then the whole country went up and
Oh,
you know what I'm saying, and
yeah, yeah,
started
yeah.
talking about Black Lives Matter, it really hit home because we've been talking about this at work. You know what I'm saying? We was already like fighting this fight, and but it became heightened, right? Because the whole country was like now in alignment with us, and so many corporations were not being held accountable. So we're here in our very lived experience now. All the things we've been saying for the last 2 or 3 years, because that's how long we've been talking about it, right? Suddenly had another sort of it's like jolted so many of us to be like, yo, we wasn't bugging this whole time. Like what we've been
Yeah.
saying, because I was not the only one who was outspoken. Let me be very clear. I had a
Right.
whole team of us that was outspoken, and it made it worse because it's like sometimes you wonder if it's just isolated to your particular corporation or company or
Yeah.
institution that you're working for or organization. But then when you start seeing that it's like across the board, like it's not just us, it
Yeah.
sort of made it worse because I feel like they were doing their best to make us think that we were crazy, that we were sort of being sort of irrational with our lived experience, and that maybe it was an interpretation that we made up in our minds or how we perceived the situation, and a lot of the gaslighting, right? A lot of that stuff was sort of in the mix of our advocacy work, like as a response to us, and but when the whole country sort of went on fire around racial justice, it just really intensified what was going on at work. And even though we were all working from home, you can feel like in my space, in my home, I can feel white supremacy all around me. Like it went through the computer screen. That's how intense it was. And so,
Yeah.
and I said to myself, because we was like quarantined and like working from home, I feel like almost 2 years, which was like, even though it didn't take away the experience, right, from what was going on at work, when they was asking us to come back into the workspace, I didn't know if I
Oh.
could handle that. That was different. I was like, wait, because I took for granted that I've been working from home. Like, yo, but
Right.
now we want you to come back into the space, even after all the stuff that just occurred, right, in the
Right.
last 2 years when we was on quarantine, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna die. That's it. I'm gonna fuck it. If I don't fuck it, I'm gonna die. Because I didn't realize, but when they was asking us to come back and be in space with people who've harmed us,
Right.
right? That was like a lot. You telling us to come share space in person now, physically, with
Right.
people who are causing us harm. And I think that was the moment I realized I couldn't be back in the space, not physically. This is safe, right? We're at a distance, but we're not playing those games in front of each other, like because it's different. Like you
Yeah.
caused me
Yeah.
harm, and now I got to go share space with you. And how am I supposed to be civil inside of that when your uncivility was so degrading this whole time? What am I supposed to do with that? So I knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back into the space physically because it was going to cause me more harm, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like if you think about people
It
who've
takes a
done
toll
harm,
on you
it
for
takes a
sure.
toll. But now you got to
Yeah.
go be with the people who are
Yeah.
technically your abusers,
It's like
right? It's like a
triggering
domestic
again. You gotta
violence.
like,
Yeah,
you almost gotta like relive that experience just from seeing some people.
bro. I swear, I likened it to a toxic relationship. When you think about
Yeah.
domestic violence survivors, like they're having a toxic relationship with their partner, and it felt like that. I was having a toxic relationship with my professional space, with my employer, right? And I, I couldn't go back. I couldn't be physically in a space with somebody who I felt was abusing their power over me. You know what I'm saying? I just couldn't. Like
I get it.
and that was
I
it. That was
what
it.
an interesting thing that you said that is really important to highlight is this idea of they made me feel like I was bugging, right? And that happens to a lot of people, not even like it happens on an individual level, right? Because we don't talk about these experiences around like what happens at work or like things that I've experienced. Because we don't talk about it, we don't know that other people are experiencing them, and because of that we feel alone. But when we isolate and we feel alone, we feel like we're the problem. We're like, yo, they're probably right. I am too much. I do talk like this. I should change. I am too aggressive. I am. But then when you find out other people are experiencing the same thing, not that you're happy that other people are experiencing it, but there's a sigh of like relief because you're like, oh shit, wait, no, it's not me. It's like a macro level issue that we're experiencing. So a lot of people like, but that's the powerful thing about sharing our experiences. You realize like, well, maybe it's all academic institutions. Wait, no, maybe.
It's
Oh, wait, it's also finance. Oh, wait, it's also tech. Wait, it's fucking everybody.
everybody.
Yeah, because oftentimes, like, there's not that many people that look like us in that room. So we can't just simply look over and be like, yo, am I crazy? Because that would be the simple shit. You know what I mean? And y'all can just have a conversation in that moment and be like, nah, you're not crazy. I saw that shit too. Like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
Because
You
we're
know,
so separated, we gotta find a way to like make those connections.
and yo, you know what's so fucking crazy about that shit? That fucking bugs me out. That makes me want to say fuck. Is that they isolate us on purpose. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, tell me about
Like we're
that.
not a. So okay. So when I came into the space, um, and I
They
thought I was
isolate
really
us on
dealing.
purpose.
I was dealing with it on my own, and I would have to speak to my supervisors about my experience. But I wasn't breaking bread with other colleagues, right? Like yo, because they didn't know me, right? But they sort of tried to like isolate me so that I feel like I'm alone. But because I kept sharing and sharing and sharing, and I was relentless, I wouldn't. You're not gonna sun me. You're not gonna censor me, right? Which was, they was trying to buck break me. That's what they was trying to do, right? Sort of making me feel like I was the problem. But I just kept feeling the same things over and over again. So I knew I wasn't tripping. But then as I kept speaking, other people who related to
Yeah.
my experience, who was often silent, well, always silent about their experiences, started sharing with me on the low low.
Because you
So,
started it.
because I started it. So now like
Exactly. It's like modeled behavior.
yeah, and so then and then it became a momentum. But the thing is, and then so that's how the team was sort of cultivated, right? It's because so
Yeah.
many of us had like experiences, but we didn't know because they isolated us from each other on purpose. You can only talk to your
Interesting.
supervisor about these things. When your supervisor is not trying to, be about that life because that's a HR situation, really. And so most supervisors, when it comes to like racism or when it comes to like dealing with sort of discrimination in the workplace, don't know how to work with HR. And we know HR is not for us; it's for the organization, right? And so,
Well,
um,
yeah. Every department's. I mean, every department's for the organization technically.
well, yeah, but I'm saying, but they make HR look like it's
Yeah.
for us. Like, go to HR; they'll support you. No, they won't. They'll make you think you're crazy too. And so, and so, the isolation was on purpose. We were not encouraged to share amongst each other. We was encouraged only to share with our supervisors who were all mostly white.
Yeah. I mean, look at it. Look at a topic like that's such a fascinating way to put it. I never thought about like the intentional isolation. Like, and that's kind of the thing you talk about around like, yo, it's not me. It's a system at place, right?
Yes.
But think about even something as simple as like when you get a job, the first thing they tell you is like, yo, don't tell anyone or your colleagues like how much money you make or what level you're at. You can only talk to your supervisor about it. Like, no, there's no law against that. Like, but talk about that. Like, it's interesting. There's so many systems in place that it's just like you got to start questioning that shit. Like, why?
Bro, even when you think
Like,
about
why do
like,
they want us to do that?
because I feel like if we know collectively what's going
Yeah,
on,
of
then we
course,
can band
exactly,
together, right?
exactly.
Collectively. And they
It's
know that
power in that.
power in the numbers. And I think,
But if they
what's so
separate us, we start losing it.
what's fucked up? Here's another thing I just got
So many
reminded of.
things.
But like when I did go to OEE finally, to
To
share
what?
about OEE, the Office of Employment Equity, which is
Oh,
a sub department of the Human Resources. They're
yeah,
supposed to be the ones designed to support you through these things.
right.
So the Office of Employment Equity, OEE, when I went to them to obviously make formal complaints at this point, we couldn't share about it to our colleagues. We had to keep it on the hush hush, right?
What do you
So
mean?
we didn't. Meaning, if I'm telling you I'm dealing with racial discrimination in the workplace and I'm making a formal complaint about it at this point, inside of the policy of how you work with them, you can't share with your other colleagues what you're dealing with.
Oh, it's like let's keep this between
Yeah,
us.
let's don't.
This
Yeah,
investigation.
yes, yeah. We don't talk to your colleagues about it. Don't say anything because if we know that there's more than one of us doing OEE reports, then we'd be like, oh shit, we are doing the OEE reports. Oh, so it's not just about us individually, right? It's about what's going on systemically, and that's,
Interesting.
and so that was, and so it's funny because even when I talked about like having a white supervisor to talk to about these things, I had other colleagues of color who were making the same complaints to the same supervisor, and I had no idea, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you feel me? Because other people of color were saying the
Ah,
same things, but I didn't know because my supervisor was
right,
not telling us the tea. You know what I'm saying? We had to like figure out
right.
eventually, by accident or happenstance that we're dealing with similar things. But meanwhile, the whole time we was dealing with similar things. But the white supervisors, and I'm not saying anything about my supervisor, but what I'm saying is that there is this sort of thing, and I think, and this is a leadership thing, was always mostly white, where they have to sort of protect each other, right? So even
Yeah.
though you might be supervising someone who you care about and you are committed to their success, maybe I don't know how much, but you're going to look out for your own people first
Or
as
and
leaders.
yourself,
Yeah,
because you want to keep that job. Let's be real, right?
yeah, yeah. So
I get it.
and it makes it so that we don't get to sort of ever feel empowered in the workspace, right? By design, it's not even like it's accidental though. Like that's the thing about it. None of this is accidental. You know what I'm saying? All of it is. I'm burning Palo Santo just to like get my energy right. You know,
I
but
love it, man.
none of it is um, accidental, and I think that's the thing that's most harmful is when you learn that it's not accidental. That's the most harmful when
That's
you
the one that
start.
hurts the most.
Yeah, like yo, this shit is all on purpose. You, like the amount of time that I've wasted on creating formal complaints and filling out forms and writing emails with very specific details and examples was a waste of my time and energy because they was not about to advocate on my behalf anyway. And so that was, I think, what hurt the most is that's called institutional betrayal
Yeah.
because you're relying on the institution to protect you. And when you realize they don't, because they don't value you, and then it becomes a whole nother sort of experience. And I think most of us who are in predominantly white institutions start learning through our own experiences that we're dealing with institutional betrayal, right? But it takes it after they done took a toll on us, right? After we've been harmed, after we've been betrayed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like after the
It's
damage was
it's
done,
it's
and
too
then we
late.
sort of get present to it. Yeah.
I wish, and this is something I hope for people as well. It's like just walking into some of those experiences, because I think we also feel betrayed because we go into it with a certain expectation of like this utopia, that because we put this job on a pedestal, we put this company on a pedestal. But if we just walk into it with the idea of like, hey, this is just a value exchange. I'm gonna give them work, they're gonna give me money, or I don't know. It's kind of just like this mindset shift that I think a lot of people are doing, especially post pandemic. They're just like seeing work from like a different mindset. Anyway, I know we're at time. I'll just end with this last question. I have a lot of conversations with people around this, and you said it earlier, right? You were like, "Yo, I'm taking a risk even by like being myself in these spaces." And I know a lot of people. Some people fuck with it, some people don't. What continues to inspire you to continue being your most authentic self in these spaces?
Well, um, there's two things. I think about it off the top of my head. The first thing is my love for my community, right? Like my love and commitment to Black and Brown folk, like my community. Okay, when I get to share space with people who look like us, people that sort of have similar lived experiences, there's nothing like that in the world. And I have such a deep love and a profound respect for people in my community that that's the thing that continues to drive me forward, right? Because that's really all that matters when I think about it. You know what I'm saying? And so there's that. And then the second thing, I know that my ancestors sacrificed so much that I could be here today. You feel me? And I don't take that shit for granted. Like, there's so many people that came before us that allowed us the opportunities we have today.
Yeah.
These opportunities just didn't come. Right? The fact that we have a better quality of life than our ancestors is because of their sacrifice. We're not standing here on our own. We're on somebody else's shoulders, right? And that really is one of the things that continues to keep me in the game, right? Inside of my commitment, because yo, those people, they had it. There's so many people that still have it hard. I'm not saying that they don't. But compared to how things used to be, the fact that we could even discuss these things, that we could even share space in the way we're sharing space was not something that was, you had to go like and hide somewhere, right? Like you had to, like the Underground Railroad, you had to go do things in secret, right? And
Yeah.
so imagine what that was like, right? To sort of be in those sort of conditions and having really no laws to protect you. You had nothing, right? We were basically on our own, right? We were sort of defenseless, and as we had to face sort of white supremacy, there was no defense. We was really had to fend for ourselves, and now it's like not like that. It's different. There's like certain ways. I can't say it's that much different, but it's different enough to sort of increase the quality of our lives as black and
Yeah.
brown folk. And
Yeah.
and so I always think about my ancestors and now how hard they probably really had it compared to what I deal with or we deal with. And I can't forget that. Like they've done it for us. They sacrificed their lives for us.
Mi gente, that wraps up this week's episode of the Quién Tú Eres podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please do us a favor, like, share, comment, subscribe. If there's an option to leave a rating and review, please do so, because it's going to help ensure that these experiences get heard by as many people as possible. And that's the only way that we're going to redefine professionalism, through our stories. Thank you. See you next time.